The morning began quietly in Washington, D.C., a mist of early summer hovering over the Potomac. Inside a modest office lined with worn wooden bookshelves and photographs of days long ago, Senator John Neely Kennedy was doing what he often did, sifting through the day's correspondence. The routine was ordinary, almost mundane. Letters came every morning from across Louisiana and beyond, pleas for help, requests for meetings, words of gratitude, or sharp criticism. They came by the dozens. But this morning was different. Among the stack of envelopes was one that stood out. Its paper was rough, its edges slightly frayed. The handwriting was elegant but firm, in deep black ink. No official seal, no return address, just the words, "To Honorable Senator John Neely Kennedy, United States of America." Kennedy picked it up, brushing his finger across the surface, and felt a quiet weight to it. Not physical, but something deeper. Against his assistant's instinct to open the more official envelopes first, Kennedy chose this one. Slowly, he tore it open and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The text was handwritten in French and translated to English for him, its strokes deliberate, hopeful. Dear Senator Kennedy, I write to you not as a politician, but as a humble son of Burkina Faso, a boy who grew up surrounded by dust and adversity, yet watched from afar as you spoke openly and bravely about justice and integrity. You may wonder why this letter finds its way across the ocean. It is because you have inspired more than votes and policies. You have inspired belief. You have inspired resilience. Here, in Burkina Faso, I carry a nation upon my shoulders. But deep within the heart of this land, it is the children, countless and hopeful, that bear the heaviest burdens. They deserve a witness. They deserve a visitor. Someone who understands that strength is not only found in the corridors of power, but also in the quiet moments of belonging. Will you come? Will you walk the dusty streets of Ouagadougou? Will you witness for yourself the warmth of these people? Will you grant these children the honor of seeing a man they only know through crackling radios and faint television signals? The door is open. The heart of Burkina Faso is open, and within it, a humble invitation rests for you. Respectfully, Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition, Burkina Faso. For a long moment, the room was silent except for the sound of Kennedy's slow breathing. He read the words again, and then a third time. He had received countless letters throughout his career, but none like this. Not an ask for aid, not an offer for trade or policy. An invitation rooted in sincerity, an invitation rooted in belonging. Have you ever been to Burkina Faso? Kennedy asked quietly, looking up at his assistant. No, sir, she replied softly. I can find out more if you'd like. No, he said, brushing a hand over the page. That's not the point. He stood, walked to the office window, and gazed across the city he knew so well. The domes and spires of Washington shimmered in the morning light, yet for some reason Kennedy felt as if his heart was elsewhere. Not in the heart of American politics, but somewhere far beyond it, in a place where hope felt more urgent, more profound. "What do you want to do?" his assistant asked after a long silence. He turned, a faint smile breaking across his lined, serious face. "I want to go." A week later, John Neely Kennedy was boarding a quiet private flight, stripped of the usual entourage that came with a United States senator. This was no state visit, no official mission, no press conference announced. Just a man responding to a call that felt too honest to ignore. As the jet cut across the Atlantic, Kennedy read the letter for the 100th time. He thought of the boy who had watched him from afar, of a president leading a fragile nation in a complex world, of children finding strength in moments that felt insignificant to others. Landing in Ouagadougou felt like stepping into another world. The air shimmered with dust and warmth. The hum of traffic mixed with the sound of voices, some laughing, some calling out in a language Kennedy didn't understand, but felt in his chest nonetheless. As he emerged from the small aircraft, there was no red carpet, no formal guard. Instead, he was met by a lone aide and a black SUV adorned with a simple Burkina Faso flag. "Welcome, Senator Kennedy," said the aide, bowing slightly. "President Traoré is expecting you, but first he wishes for you to understand this land." With that, Kennedy was escorted across the bustling capital, past market stalls that overflowed with color, children chasing goats in narrow alleyways, women carrying baskets upon their heads, and men repairing motorcycles in the blazing sun. It was as if every corner spoke of resilience. Then came the school, a low building with a tin roof, walls streaked with paint and dust, a handwritten sign that read, "École Espoir," the School of Hope. Kennedy stepped out of the car, brushing the dust from his pants, and was led inside. Here, under a ceiling of corrugated metal, he met the children. A boy no older than 10 smiled shyly and waved. A girl stepped forward, reaching for Kennedy's hand, placing a tiny paper star in his palm. A teacher spoke softly. "They have watched your speeches. They have watched you stand firm for what you believe. To them, you are not a politician. You are proof that words can carry across oceans and matter." Rise in his throne. Suddenly, the boy from the letter became more than words. Suddenly, this was not a mission of politics or borders. This was a mission of the heart. And when he was finally brought to the modest presidential residence, he was greeted by Ibrahim Traoré himself, tall, poised, with a gaze that spoke of trials and victories unseen by the world. "Welcome, my friend," Traoré said, extending a hand. "Thank you for this invitation," Kennedy replied quietly, shaking it firmly. "Today we walk together," Traoré said, "for every child who needs to believe that no matter where you come from, your voice can travel further than your feet can walk." In that moment, surrounded by the silence of a hopeful land, John Neely Kennedy felt a shift deep within, one that would redefine not only the trip, but the very nature of what it meant to witness the strength and dignity of a people long overlooked. That evening, as the sun sank low and bathed the dusty streets of Ouagadougou in amber light, John Neely Kennedy and President Ibrahim Traoré found themselves sitting in a quiet garden behind the presidential residence. It was a humble space. A few wooden benches, a small cluster of trees, and a faint breeze carrying the soft hum of cicadas. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of the day was still settling between them. The school, the shy handshakes from hopeful children, the shy grins from teachers, and the quiet strength Kennedy had witnessed in every corner he had visited. He felt the sting of guilt rising in him, guilt that came from knowing how often he had overlooked places like this in the corridors of American politics. Finally, it was Traoré who spoke, breaking the silence. "Do you ever wonder, John, why some nations rise quickly while others must carry the weight of poverty and war?" he asked quietly, brushing a hand across the edge of the wooden bench. Kennedy glanced down at the dusty earth between his shoes. "More times than I can count," he replied, "but I've learned that strength doesn't always come from abundance. Sometimes it's shaped by scarcity, molded by a fire that only those who walk through it can understand." Traoré smiled faintly. "That's a truth many leaders forget. They walk upon marble and forget the earth that shaped their nations." He rose, brushing a palm down the crisp fabric of his shirt, and waved for Kennedy to follow. Together, they walked the perimeter of the garden until they came upon a weathered stone monument. Etched upon it, in faded letters, was a simple phrase in French, "Pour tous les enfants du Burkina Faso." For all the children of Burkina Faso. Traoré placed a hand upon the stone and spoke, voice soft and resonant. "Each child is a seed, not for today, not for ourselves, but for a future long after we are gone. These seeds must be tended, not by promises, but by moments, not by speeches, but by action." He turned to Kennedy then, looking deeply into the American politician's eyes. "That is why I asked you to come. Not because you can fix all that is broken here, or because you have answers we don't, but because to witness is the first step to understanding. To understand is the first step to respect. And respect, true respect, can move mountains across borders, across politics, across walls we have built ourselves." For a moment, Kennedy felt the sting of emotion welling in his chest. This was not a conversation about foreign aid or alliances, nor about policies and speeches that would dominate the news. This was about the quiet spaces in the heart where nations find each other. He nodded slowly, voice wavering as he spoke. "President Traoré, I came here expecting to teach, to give, to understand in some abstract way. But it's clear that I am the one learning tonight. Not about politics, but about humanity. Not about policies, but about belonging. Not about nations, but about the threads that tie a boy in Burkina Faso to a man in Washington, D.C. Traoré smiled faintly, brushing a hand across the stone. "Then perhaps the threads have done their work already." The following morning, Kennedy returned to the small school he had visited the day before. The sun rose slowly, painting long shadows across the courtyard. The children were already there, some chasing a worn-out ball, others perched upon a low wall, whispering and giggling. To Kennedy, it felt like a scene suspended between worlds, a place where time slowed down long enough for him to witness life at its simplest and most profound. He was met by a teacher named Awa, a tall, elegant woman with deep, knowing eyes. "Today you will help teach," she said, smiling as she pressed a piece of chalk into his palm. He looked down at the chalk as if it were a relic, a symbol of something sacred. "Me?" he asked, half laughing, half uncertain. Awa nodded, brushing a hand across the dusty blackboard. You have words that can cross oceans, Senator. Here, words matter. Here, a story can shape a life. Will you tell one? And so he did. Not a speech about politics, not a lesson about history, but a simple story. A story about a boy from rural Louisiana who grew up with nothing more than grit and a love for words. A boy who was taught by teachers and mentors, shaped by moments of doubt and moments of belonging. A boy who learned that no matter where one came from, strength came from the heart, and belonging came from extending a hand. The children watched, wide-eyed. They didn't understand every word, but they felt it. They felt the sincerity in Kennedy's voice, the warmth of a man who came not to command, but to connect. At the end of the lesson, a boy with a shy smile stepped forward. He spoke quickly in French, and Awa translated. He says, "Thank you for reminding us that we matter, no matter where we stand in the world." Kennedy felt a sting at the corner of his eye. In that moment, surrounded by the hopeful gazes of children who had little but gave much, he felt the threads of belonging weaving themselves tighter, not because of who he was as a politician, but because of who he was as a witness. That afternoon, Kennedy and Traoré met again, this time in the courtyard of the presidential residence. A quiet wind stirred the dry leaves and the sound of children's laughter floated faintly from the distance. "Today, I watched you with the children," Traoré said softly. "They will remember this day, not because you gave them gifts, but because you gave them your time." Kennedy shook his head, voice soft. "What I gave was nothing compared to what I received. These moments, these lessons, I will carry with me for the rest of my life. You've built something here that goes far beyond borders and politics. You've built belonging." Traoré smiled, brushing dust from the edge of the courtyard table. "That is the work, my friend, to create belonging where there was none, to foster dignity where it was stripped away, to teach that every boy and girl, no matter where their path began, can rise if given a chance and a witness." Then, reaching into his shirt pocket, Traoré pulled out an envelope. Its paper was worn, edges soft from countless hands. He offered it to Kennedy. "This is for you, not as a politician, not as a visitor, as a witness." With trembling hands, Kennedy opened the envelope. Inside was a drawing, a crayon depiction of a boy and a man holding hands, a rising sun behind them. At the bottom was a scrawled message, "For you, John, from us, the children of Burkina Faso. You matter. We matter. Together, we rise." Kennedy sank down onto the edge of the stone bench, brushing a hand across his eyes. In that moment, he felt the threads pulling tighter. Threads that crossed borders, transcended borders, and spoke to the heart of what it means to be human. He rose, offered a hand to Traoré, and spoke quietly but firmly. "Then let this be the chapter that never ends. Let this be the story we write together. Not for ourselves, but for every child who looks to the horizon and wonders if the world can be bigger, brighter, and belonging to them too." Traoré smiled, gripping Kennedy's hand firmly. "Then together, we write." The morning of Kennedy's departure arrived quietly. The sun rose pale and golden over the rooftops of Ouagadougou, bathing the dusty streets in soft light. In the courtyard of the presidential residence, Kennedy stood with a small bag slung over his shoulder, surrounded by a handful of people. Teachers, aides, a few older students. The air felt charged with emotion, yet serene. President Traoré stepped forward, extending a hand. "Today you return to America," he said quietly. "But you leave a piece of yourself here, and you take a piece of Burkina Faso with you. Will you carry it well?" Kennedy smiled faintly, brushing the dust from his jacket. "I will carry it every moment, every word, every lesson learned. This place, these people, they've reshaped how I understand belonging. Not by borders, but by heartbeats." Traoré pulled him into a brief, firm embrace. No press, no cameras, no titles exchanged between them. Just two men from vastly different worlds, connected by threads stronger than steel. As Kennedy stepped into the waiting vehicle, a group of children came running down the lane. The boy with shy eyes, the one who had offered him a drawing, waved wildly. Kennedy waved back, swallowing the lump in his throat, and pressed the drawing closer to his chest. The car pulled away slowly, making its way down the dusty lane. Kennedy watched from the window as the children grew smaller, then disappeared from view. Yet he felt no sense of loss, only belonging. Belonging to a chapter that would forever define him. High above the Sahara, as the jet cut across a crimson evening, Kennedy sat quietly, staring out the window. The desert below shimmered like an ocean of gold. In the quiet hum of the aircraft, he pulled out a small notebook and began to write. "Today I learned that belonging is a seed that can be planted in the most unlikely of places." The boy in Burkina Faso, the teacher with a smile, the president with a quiet strength, they reminded me that we are all threads in the same cloth. What separates us is geography. What binds us is shared humanity. What transforms us is moments like these. He paused, brushing a hand across the page. These weren't words for a speech or a campaign. These were words for himself, a reminder of a lesson learned far from the corridors of politics. As the stars winked into view, Kennedy felt a quiet resolve rising within him. What came next for him would be shaped by this journey, not by party lines or political victories, but by the deeper, quieter call to serve, to witness, to listen, and to remember the faces and stories that shaped this chapter of his life. A week later, back in Washington, Kennedy returned to his office. The walls were lined with framed photographs, moments captured throughout his long career. Yet this morning, he placed a new picture upon the desk. Not one of handshakes with leaders or campaign moments under blazing lights, but a simple drawing from a boy in Burkina Faso. A man and a boy holding hands, with the rising sun behind them. A young staffer noticed it and asked quietly, "Is that new, Senator?" Kennedy smiled faintly. "It's new, yes, but it's also one of the oldest stories there is. It's about belonging. It's about knowing that no matter where we come from, we can always walk forward, together." As the staffer nodded and left, Kennedy sank into his chair, brushing a finger across the drawing. The chapter he had just lived was more than a visit. It was a reminder that belonging is a bridge built from moments, connections, and trust. A reminder that in a world often divided by borders and politics, it is belonging, the simplest and deepest thread. that can unite nations, heal wounds, and carry generations forward.